I think she was a congressional representative before she became governor, and I saw a picture in 2015 or something with her husband.
For 30 years, they stood side by side through everything life threw at them. Through the loss of a father, through struggling harvests on a South Dakota farm, through the relentless pressure of political campaigns, and through the dizzying climb from a small-town ranch to the highest corridors of federal power, Kristi Noem and her husband Brian Noem built something that most people only dream of. A life, a family, a partnership that looked, from the outside, completely unshakable. But sometimes, the things that look the most solid on the surface are quietly cracking underneath. Behind the political rallies, the press conferences, and the carefully posed family photos, something was shifting. Whispers were growing louder. Rumors that had once floated quietly through Washington's political circles were now impossible to ignore. And on one particular March afternoon, inside a packed Senate hearing room, with cameras rolling and the entire nation watching, everything that had been kept behind closed doors was suddenly dragged into the blinding light. Brian Noem sat just a few seats away from his wife, and what he witnessed that day was something that, by all accounts, no husband of 30 years ever wants to see coming. This is the full story, from a quiet farm in South Dakota to one of the most dramatic political scandals in recent American memory. The date was March 3rd. The setting was the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room in Washington, D.C., a place built for serious political business, for tough questions and carefully rehearsed answers. But what unfolded that day went far beyond the usual Washington theater. Kristi Noem had been called to testify in her capacity as Secretary of Homeland Security. The initial subject of the hearing was straightforward enough. Lawmakers wanted answers about the actions of U.S. immigration and customs enforcement agents and Border Patrol officers operating in Minneapolis. Reports had already set the country on edge. 2 U.S. citizens had allegedly been killed during enforcement operations in the city. Protests were spreading. Communities were demanding accountability. The political temperature was already dangerously high. Noem arrived prepared to defend the administration's immigration agenda. And defend it she did, firmly, deliberately, without apology. She stood behind the agents involved, backed the approach championed by President Donald Trump, and pushed back against every line of criticism that the senators threw her way. In that sense, the hearing began the way most people expected it would. But then the questioning shifted, and everything changed. It wasn't immigration policy that made the room go quiet. It was a name that had been floating through Washington whisper networks for months. Corey Lewandowski, a longtime political advisor and close ally of Donald Trump, who had been operating in and around the Department of Homeland Security. The rumors connecting his name to Kristi Noem's had been building slowly, gathering weight in political circles, passed between journalists and insiders in hushed conversations. Until now, those rumors had never been confronted so directly, so publicly, so unavoidably. Democratic Senator Sheldon Whitehouse changed that. His questioning was pointed, deliberate, and uncomfortable. He pressed Noem directly about the allegations. He wasn't dancing around the subject. He wanted answers. And the entire room, every senator, every staffer, every journalist, every camera, was watching. Then came a moment that would be replayed on television screens and social media feeds for days afterward. Senator Whitehouse held up a large photograph. The image showed what appeared to be a bedroom area inside a private aircraft that Noem had reportedly used. He looked directly at her. He asked her to explain it. The murmur that ran through the room was immediate and unmistakable. Clips from that exchange spread across the internet within minutes. The reaction was fierce, polarized, and relentless. But what many observers noticed, perhaps more than anything else that was said or shown in that room, was something quieter. Something that didn't involve any words at all. Just a few seats behind Kristi Noem sat her husband, Brian, the man who had stood beside her for nearly 3 decades. The man who had left his own ambitions on the back burner to support hers. The man who had managed a farm, raised the children, and built a business, all while his wife's political star climbed higher and higher. He was sitting right there, And when the cameras caught his expression during the most uncomfortable moments of the questioning, what they captured was a face that told a story all by itself. Tight, still, visibly uneasy. A man processing something in public that no one should ever have to process in public. The political fallout from the hearing was swift. Not long after the testimony concluded, Donald Trump dismissed Noem from her role as Secretary of Homeland Security. The sudden removal only amplified the chaos already surrounding her name. Online commentary exploded. Social media users on platform X openly speculated about what the scandal would mean for her marriage. Some predicted divorce. Others pointed to Brian's expression during the hearing as evidence that the relationship was already under severe strain. The following day brought no relief. Another lawmaker, Representative Sidney Kamlager-Dove, asked Noem directly during additional questioning whether she had engaged in a personal relationship with Lewandowski while leading the department. Representative Jamie Raskin pressed her again about the blanket, the aircraft, and the mysterious circumstances surrounding a Coast Guard pilot who had reportedly been dismissed after discovering personal items belonging to Noem on another plane. Each question cut a little deeper. Each moment added another layer to a story that was becoming impossible to contain. And through it all, the question that lingered most powerfully wasn't political. It was deeply personal. After 30 years of marriage, after everything they had built and survived together, what was Brian Noem truly feeling? And did he see any of it coming? To understand Brian Noem, you have to understand where he came from. He wasn't born into politics. He didn't seek the spotlight. He was a farm kid from Hamlin County, South Dakota, raised in the same kind of rural, close-knit community that shaped his future wife. He and Kristi actually attended the same high school, though Brian was 2 years older. He happened to be friends with Kristi's older brother, which meant their lives overlapped in the natural, unhurried way that small-town lives tend to do. School events, community gatherings, shared connections. Eventually, those overlapping worlds turned into something more. By the time they married in May of 1992, Brian had already earned his finance degree from Northern State University. He was practical, grounded, and quiet in the way that many people who grow up working the land tend to be. Kristi was still completing her studies when they wed, just 20 years old, and already carrying the energy and ambition that would eventually take her far beyond South Dakota. In the early years, life was simple and demanding in equal measure. The two of them worked the farm together, raising cattle, growing crops of corn, soybeans, and wheat, doing the unglamorous, back-breaking work that farming requires. There was no political career yet, no national profile, just two young people from the same small corner of the country trying to build something real. Then, in 1994, everything shifted. Kristi's father, Ronald Arnold, died in a devastating accident on the family farm. He had climbed into a grain bin to fix a problem when the grain collapsed around him. He was only 49 years old. Kristi was pregnant with their first child at the time, still trying to manage her studies. The loss was sudden and brutal. With her siblings living away from home, the responsibility of keeping the farm operational fell heavily on Kristi and Brian's shoulders. She left college. They buckled down together. They worked through the grief and the pressure, and they kept the farm alive. Brian spent nearly a decade working directly on the farm during those years. Eventually, as things stabilized and Kristi's siblings returned to help, he transitioned into the business world. In 2003, he took a position managing an insurance agency at Bryan State Bank. 7 years later, in 2010, he purchased the agency outright and built it into his own company, Noem Insurance, which he continues to run from South Dakota. While Brian was building his business, Kristi was building something else entirely. In 2006, she entered politics for the first time, winning a seat in the South Dakota House of Representatives. From that point forward, her career followed an upward trajectory that would eventually carry her all the way to the federal government. Through every step of that journey, through congressional campaigns, gubernatorial races, national media attention, and eventually a cabinet appointment, Brian stayed mostly in the background. Family members who know him will say that was always intentional. He never saw himself as a political partner seeking his own spotlight. He saw himself as the person holding things together from behind the scenes, supporting his wife, raising their children, running his business, being the steady, quiet constant in a world that was becoming anything but quiet. Those 3 children, daughters Cassidy and Kennedy and son Booker, grew up watching both of their parents work hard in very different arenas. Over the years, both daughters have married and started families of their own. Brian walked each of them down the aisle. Cassidy married Kyle Peters in June 2019. Kennedy married Tanner Frick in October 2022. Today, the couple have grandchildren, 3 from Cassidy and 1 daughter from Kennedy. By every outward measure, the Noem family had grown into exactly the kind of multi-generational rooted, faith-based family that both Brian and Kristi had always spoken about valuing, which makes the events of recent months all the more devastating. When the scandal surrounding Kristi Noem began to fully surface in public, members of Brian's extended family found themselves in a painful and complicated position. Some spoke quietly about what they had observed over the years, the pressure that had built slowly around Brian as his wife's political career expanded, the whispers that had circulated privately long before they became national news, and the deeply personal faith that they believe has kept him committed to his marriage even as it has been tested in ways most couples never face. According to relatives, Brian made a defining personal decision approximately 20 years ago, a decision that has shaped nearly every major choice he has made since. He reportedly told family members that he believed supporting his wife was not simply a personal preference. It was, in his view, a calling from God. One relative described it plainly. He decided that it was his calling to support her in whatever she decided to do, and that belief has guided him ever since. For those who know him, that faith is not a performance. It runs deep, lived quietly in the choices he makes every day. He believes in the permanence of marriage. He believes in honoring his commitments regardless of how difficult circumstances become. And he believes in putting his family above everything else. But even people who deeply respect his faith have begun to wonder, out loud, whether there are limits to what any person, even the most devoted and patient, can continue to absorb. Some family members have described the situation using one word: humiliation. Not because of politics, not because of policy disagreements or public controversies, but because of the deeply personal nature of what has now been exposed in one of the most public forums imaginable. One relative admitted openly that the moment Kristi Noem failed to clearly deny the affair allegations during congressional questioning was a moment that landed like a blow. "What gets me," the family member said, "is she couldn't say no. When she was being grilled about it, she couldn't say no." That inability or unwillingness to offer a flat denial was something that resonated far beyond the hearing room. There's also a longer, quieter tension that some relatives describe having simmered beneath the surface for years. Relationships between Kristi and certain members of the Noem family, they say, have never been particularly warm. One relative was blunt about it, suggesting that the strains ran deeper than most outsiders ever realized and had been building long before the current scandal brought everything into the open. "She's not the same girl," one family member said softly, reflecting on how much had changed from the person they once knew closely. And yet, despite all of that, despite the pain, the humiliation, the unanswered questions, and the public spectacle, most people who know Brian Noem well believe he will remain committed to his marriage. Not out of naivety, not out of weakness, but because of exactly who he is and what he believes. Brian is a Christian man, one relative explained simply. He believes that marriage is forever. His children factor heavily into that calculation as well. Family members describe him as extraordinarily devoted to his kids, and the idea of breaking apart the family unit, even under circumstances as painful as these, is something he would weigh with tremendous seriousness. Those close to him believe the private reality of this moment has been far more painful than anything visible in public. The stillness and the tight expression captured by cameras during the hearing were only the smallest glimpse of something far heavier being carried behind closed doors. One relative reflected on the strange, painful duality of watching him sit in that hearing room. On one hand, they were glad he was there, that he showed up, that he sat behind her, that he maintained his presence even as the questions became almost unbearable. On the other hand, they quietly hoped that his being there might finally force him to fully confront a reality he may have been working very hard to avoid for a very long time. Maybe he has to face it now, the relative said. To fully understand how Kristi and Brian Noem arrived at this moment, you have to trace the arc of a political career that moved faster and burned brighter than almost anyone from Hamlin County, South Dakota, could have anticipated. It started modestly. In 2006, Kristi won a seat in the South Dakota House of Representatives. She was a farm woman with 3 kids, a husband running an insurance business, and an instinct for connecting with ordinary voters. Within her second term, she had already been appointed Assistant Majority Leader, an early signal of what was coming. In 2010, she made her move onto the national stage. She ran for South Dakota's single seat in the U.S. House of Representatives, challenging a well-established Democratic incumbent named Stephanie Herseth-Sandlin, who had served 3 terms and was widely expected to hold the seat. Noem won anyway. The victory drew immediate national attention. Conservative media celebrated her. Party leadership took notice. She was assigned to serve as a liaison between newly elected Republican members and House leadership, a role that placed her close to the center of political strategy almost immediately. She was re-elected to the House 3 times, building a loyal base back home while also completing something she had left unfinished years earlier. In 2011, she earned her bachelor's degree in political science, finally finishing the education that her father's death had interrupted nearly 2 decades before. In 2018, she ran for governor of South Dakota and won, becoming the first woman in the state's history to hold that office. Her handling of the COVID-19 pandemic became one of the defining moments of her first term. Refusing to shut down businesses, declining to mandate masks, drawing both fierce criticism and fierce support in roughly equal measure. South Dakota ended that period with one of the highest COVID death rates in the country, but also one of the lowest unemployment rates. The debate over her decisions continues to this day. Her national profile kept expanding. Major newspapers speculated about a presidential run. She was mentioned as a possible running mate for Donald Trump. In the end, she didn't run for president, and J.D. Vance became Trump's vice presidential pick instead. But Trump still had a place for her. He nominated her as Secretary of Homeland Security, and the Senate confirmed her in January 2025 by a vote of 59 to 34. As Secretary, she became one of the most visible and aggressive faces of the administration's immigration enforcement. She appeared at raids. She wore tactical gear alongside ICE agents. She attended press conferences about National Guard deployments. In one notable incident, Senator Alex Padilla of California attempted to approach and question her at a press conference, and members of her security team pushed him to the ground and briefly detained him. She later said she hadn't realized who he was. The controversies followed her like a shadow. Long before the current scandal, there had been questions about her involvement in a real estate licensing decision that benefited her daughter. There had been a costly legal settlement involving a terminated contract with a nonprofit organization. There had been the widely criticized story in her memoir about euthanizing a young hunting dog. Each controversy faded. Each time, she pushed forward. But this one feels different, because this one isn't just political. It's personal.